I'm Liam Carter, and at 36, my mornings here in Cincinnati, Ohio, don't start with a gentle alarm but with the deep rumble of diesel engines. The sound of truck horns bounces between the brick buildings in these working-class streets, a constant reminder of the life I lead. This world is a far cry from the one I once pictured for myself, a quiet but profound detour from the future everyone assumed I would have. There isn't a trace of glamour here, just the daily grit of making ends meet. My entire universe is now contained within two small, remarkable people. My daughters. There's Mia, my 10-year-old, whose gaze is so sharp and full of questions it feels like she's trying to drink in the whole world at once. And then I have my little Chloe, who is 6. Her tiny hand grips mine with a trust so absolute it can still take my breath away. It's as if I am her entire sky. These two girls are the beginning and the end of my story. They are everything I have left. Every bone-weary shift, every flicker of doubt is completely erased the moment I see them smile. I know in my soul I would walk through fire just to keep that radiance in their eyes. Our apartment is tucked into a corner of a neighborhood that has clearly seen better days. The paint on the buildings flakes away like old memories, and it's not unusual for the sudden wail of a fire engine to jolt us all from sleep in the pitch black of night. It's a place with a history etched into every crack in the pavement. The space is small, barely big enough for the double bed we sometimes all pile into, a lumpy sofa I hauled home from a weekend flea market, and the little dining table crammed against a wall. That table is where so many of our meals happen, more often than not sandwiches sticky with strawberry jam. That's Chloe's absolute favorite, and the joy on her face is worth more than any 5-star meal. My worldly possessions don't amount to much, but with Mia and Chloe in my life, I have more than enough reason to pull myself out of bed every single morning. That's the truth. Even on the days when a bone-deep exhaustion makes my limbs feel like they're filled with lead, just getting my feet to the floor can feel like a victory. I hold down 2 jobs, a constant juggling act to keep our small world from collapsing. From sunrise until late afternoon, I'm a worker at a sprawling food processing plant. The air in there is a permanent fog of flour dust mixed with the metallic smell of machine oil. I spend hours heaving heavy crates, my shirt soaked through with sweat as I race the clock to finish my quota by 4 o'clock. As soon as that shift ends, I climb into my rattling old delivery van and start making runs all over the city, a route that keeps me out until long after the girls are asleep. The grind is brutal, but the paychecks keep the lights on, buy the groceries, and cover our rent. Sometimes there's even a little left over to surprise Mia with a new book she's been wanting, or to see Chloe's face light up when I bring home a simple doll from the discount store. There are nights, though, when the thought of leaving them alone in that apartment is almost more than I can bear. The hardest part of my day is walking out that door for the second time. Mia is only 10, and while she's starting to grasp the complexities of our life, she's still a little girl who's scared of the dark and the strange city noises that echo through our thin walls. My little Chloe, though, is another story. She doesn't try to understand it. She just flat out refuses to let me leave, wrapping her arms around my leg in a silent, desperate plea. If I try to walk out that door for my second shift, Chloe's small body will erupt in wrenching sobs, a sound that tears right through me. She'll cling to my leg, refusing to let go. I've learned there's no fighting it, so I bring them along. In the back of the cold delivery van, I build them a small nest out of old blankets and their own pillows. A safe cocoon where they huddle together while I navigate the city's dark, deserted streets under the lonely glow of the streetlights. Most nights, Chloe eventually drifts off to the steady rumble of the engine, but Mia, my Mia, often stays awake in the passenger seat beside me. Her voice, clear and bright, fills the quiet cab with stories from her day. She'll tell me all about her literature teacher or recount a joke a classmate told that made her laugh so hard she couldn't breathe. From the back, I'll sometimes hear Chloe humming a soft, wandering tune, a children's song whose origin is a complete mystery to me. These moments, suspended in time and exhaustion, are my lifeline. They are the quiet, undeniable proof that we are still a family, and in that space I tell myself that as long as I have them, I can withstand anything. But that strength isn't a constant. It can be terrifyingly fragile. It often shatters in the dead of night after the girls are finally asleep and the apartment falls completely silent. That's when you'll find me slumped on the sofa, staring at the pile of bills on the table until the numbers blur. A physical pressure settles on my shoulders and deep in my chest, a weight that feels like it could crush me. And in those quiet, desperate hours, I have to admit that I'm not always the father they deserve. I fail them sometimes. I can still see the look on Mia's face the evening I yelled at her for spilling a glass of milk. It was such a small, clumsy mistake, but the wire of my stress was stretched so incredibly thin that day that it just snapped. The look of shock and hurt in her eyes hit me harder than any fist, and the shame of my reaction still burns inside me. Of course, I pulled her into my arms immediately, my own voice thick with regret as I apologized over and over. Seeing those huge tears well up in her eyes, I made a silent, desperate promise to myself that I would never again let the pressure break me like that in front of them. My life is already a gauntlet of challenges. I can't add my own failures to their burdens. But behind this daily struggle, there's a truth I almost never speak of. My history is a world away from this life of peeling paint and late-night deliveries. My name is Liam Carter, and I am the eldest son of the esteemed Carter family of Kentucky. My parents own a magnificent, sprawling racehorse farm just outside of Lexington, a green jewel of rolling hills and white fences. Beyond that, they have a portfolio of properties that stretches across the entire state. My father, William Carter, is a formidable man, always impeccable in a crisp suit. His voice carries the unshakable weight of authority, as if he was born giving orders and having them followed without question. My mother, Eleanor, is the very definition of high society elegance. She glides through life in silk dresses, her gaze so sharp and appraising it has the power to make you feel utterly insignificant with a single glance. Their entire existence is built around one thing: reputation. They live and breathe for the legacy of the Carter name, a name synonymous with champion thoroughbreds, old money, and extravagant parties reported on in the society pages. I was raised to be the heir to that world, groomed from birth with the unwavering expectation that I would one day take over the farm, marry a woman from an equally prominent family, and ensure the Carter name continued to shine with undiminished brilliance. I was once their golden boy, the future of their dynasty. That world and all its expectations shattered the day I met Sarah, 11 years ago now. I didn't find her at a debutante ball or a charity gala. Sarah was a waitress. She worked at a little diner near the farm, a place I'd often stop for a black coffee after long, solitary writing sessions. She didn't have a pedigree or a trust fund. Just a smile so genuine it could light up a room and eyes the color of a crisp autumn morning. Her family had nothing. Her father was a mechanic with grease permanently under his fingernails, and her mother cleaned classrooms at the local elementary school. But to me, Sarah was everything. From the moment I met her, I was completely captivated. I fell in love with the sound of her laugh, the way she would tell me funny little stories about the diner's quirky customers, and her incredible ability to find pure joy in the smallest, most ordinary things. She saw the world with a clarity I'd never known. My parents, of course, were horrified. They refused to accept her, to even entertain the idea of her. To them, she was just that poor girl, a shameless gold digger they were convinced was trying to use me to claw her way up the social ladder. They told me, in no uncertain terms, that marrying Sarah would stain the family's reputation forever, that I was throwing away my entire future for a fleeting infatuation. I tried desperately to make them understand. I begged them, pleaded with them to just meet her, to see the incredible person she was through my eyes. But their minds were made of stone. They wouldn't listen. Their pride and their prejudice were walls I couldn't break through. So in the end, I chose her. I chose Sarah over everything else. We were married in a quiet, simple ceremony at City Hall with only her family and a handful of our closest friends there to witness it. My parents didn't show up. My sister Olivia didn't come either. Olivia, who is 7 years my junior, has always been our parents' perfect darling. She is beautiful, fiercely intelligent, and possesses an innate social grace. She has always known exactly how to charm and please people. She was raised in a cocoon of pure luxury. Designer dresses, summers in Europe, and a level of casual indulgence that, I have to admit, sometimes sparked a flicker of jealousy in me, even as her older brother. I don't blame Olivia for any of it, but I can't pretend there wasn't always a certain distance between us, a gap created by our different roles in the family. When I chose to marry Sarah, Olivia stood firmly with our parents. I can still picture the look she gave me, a devastating mixture of pity and contempt. She didn't have to say the words out loud. I could read her thoughts clearly. She believed I had willingly chosen failure, that I had brought this disgrace upon myself. My marriage to Sarah lasted for 9 years, but it wasn't the fairy tale I had imagined. Our love was real, deep, and true, but the unrelenting pressure of our life was a heavy burden. The reality of our finances wore on her. Sarah yearned for a more comfortable existence, for a bigger house for our growing girls, for the simple freedom of a vacation we could never ever afford. I pushed myself to the breaking point, working day and night, trying to build something better for her and for our daughters. But it was never enough. I could never quite meet the expectations that were quietly building between us. Then 2 years ago, Sarah left. I came home from a long shift to find her standing by the door with a packed suitcase at her feet. The voice she used was cold, stripped of all the warmth I once knew. "I was wrong," she said, not even looking at me. "I really thought that one day you'd inherit the family fortune." Her words hung in the air like poison. "I thought you were my way out, Liam," she continued, her eyes completely empty. "But you have nothing." She walked out of my life and into the arms of a much wealthier man, leaving me with Mia, Chloe, and a heart that felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces. In the weeks and months that followed her departure, I completely fell apart. I was lost in a fog of grief and self-doubt, questioning every decision I had ever made. Had I done something wrong? Did I not try hard enough to make her happy? Was throwing away a life of wealth, prestige, and power for her the right choice after all? The questions looped endlessly in my head, a relentless torment. But then I would look into Mia's questioning gaze or feel Chloe's small hand slip into mine, and I knew. I knew I couldn't let myself drown in that sea of sorrow. I had to find my footing again. I had to stand tall for them. As for my parents and Olivia, they had effectively severed all ties with me the day I married Sarah, all those years ago. It was a clean, cold break. Every now and then, my mother sends a brief, formal text message, a perfunctory inquiry about the girls. I know it's just an empty gesture, something she feels she must do out of a detached sense of obligation. They never invite me to holidays or major family gatherings. They never once ask if I need help. To them, I am a ghost, a painful reminder of a choice they will never forgive. For years, I've made it on my own, and there is a fierce pride in that. But I can't lie. There are days I feel completely and utterly stuck, pinned down by an exhaustion so profound it feels like it's become part of my DNA. Then one afternoon last week, I dragged myself home from the warehouse, tired and smelling of sweat and industry, and saw something completely out of place. A pristine, crisp white envelope had been slipped under my apartment door. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. Inside, printed on thick, luxurious cardstock with shimmering gold lettering, was an invitation. It was for Olivia's wedding. She was marrying David Morrison, the son of a family that owns the largest hotel chain in all of Kentucky. The wedding was set to take place at a famously lavish hotel in Lexington, a place I'd only ever seen in magazines, and there, printed in elegant script, were our names: Liam, Mia, and Chloe. We were invited. I just stood there in my small living room holding that heavy invitation, my fingers tracing the impossibly ornate, gilded letters. A confusing wave of emotion washed over me, a mix of shock, bitterness, and a tiny, foolish flicker of hope. I know deep in my gut that I'm not truly wanted there. This is an obligation, a performance for the sake of appearances, and yet a small, stubborn part of me can't help but hope. It whispers that maybe, just maybe, this could be a chance to start mending the broken bridges with my family. A chance for Mia and Chloe to finally know their grandparents and their Aunt Olivia. But even as the thought forms, a colder, more realistic voice deep inside tells me how unlikely that really is. I glanced through the cracked bedroom door. Mia and Chloe were on their knees on the bed, their heads bent together as they worked on a puzzle. Their laughter, pure and unburdened, echoed through the small apartment like a perfect melody. A knot tightened in my stomach. Should I really take them into that world? A world where I knew without a doubt that we would be judged and looked down upon from the moment we walked in. I took a deep breath and called them over. "Girls," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual and gentle. "Aunt Olivia is getting married. Grandma and Grandpa have invited us to the wedding." I held up the invitation. "Do you want to go?" Chloe's eyes immediately lit up as if I had just announced a surprise trip to a theme park. "A wedding?" she gasped, her excitement bubbling over. "Will there be cake, Daddy, and dancing?" She started bouncing on the balls of her feet, her messy blonde ponytail swinging wildly. A genuine laugh escaped me, despite the heavy weight pressing on my chest. Chloe's ability to find pure, uncomplicated joy in everything was a constant miracle. She made it seem so easy. Mia, however, was quiet. She just tilted her head, her big, thoughtful brown eyes studying my face with an unnerving intensity. At just 10 years old, she had a wisdom that sometimes felt far older than my own. "Do you want to go, Daddy?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but it held a sharp edge of perception, as if she could already sense the conflict churning inside me. Her simple question made me hesitate. The truth was, I had no idea what I wanted. For a second, I wanted to just say no. I wanted to confess that the thought of stepping back into my parents' world terrified me. A world where I had always felt like a disappointment, an outsider in my own home. But I couldn't say that to Mia. She deserved a chance to know her family, to understand a part of her own story, no matter how complicated or distant they were. "I think it'll be fun," I finally said, forcing a smile that felt tight and unnatural on my face. "There will be flowers and music." I glanced at my younger daughter. "And definitely lots of cake for Chloe." Mia nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't completely convinced. She still had that perceptive look in her eyes. She leaned over and whispered something in Chloe's ear, and a moment later they both turned to me and shouted in perfect unison, "Let's go, Daddy!" Their combined laughter, so full of life, was enough to make me forget my anxieties, if only for a few precious seconds. In that moment, I made my decision: we would go. We wouldn't go to prove a point to my parents or to Olivia. We would go because I wanted my girls to have one special day, one beautiful memory to hold on to. even if they would only see it through their innocent, hopeful eyes. Of course, preparing for a high society wedding was a challenge of its own. My savings were practically non-existent. Every dollar I earned was already allocated to rent, groceries, and the endless list of necessities for the girls. There was nothing left over for luxuries like wedding attire. But there was no way I was going to let Mia and Chloe show up in their worn-out, everyday clothes. I knew my family. I knew they would be scrutinizing our every move, every detail, from our shoes to our hair. I wanted my girls to feel confident, to have a small shield of dignity against all those unfamiliar judging stares. So I took them to a discount department store on the far side of Cincinnati. The moment we walked into the children's section, Chloe let out a gasp of pure delight. She spotted a pale pink dress with a delicate lace trim and made a beeline for it. "Daddy, I want this one," she squealed, clutching the dress to her chest as if she was afraid someone might try to snatch it away. Mia, ever my thoughtful one, chose a simple, elegant navy blue dress. But when she came out of the dressing room to show me, I swear I hardly recognized my own daughter. With her long hair pulled back neatly and her eyes shining with a quiet excitement, she looked like a little princess. I had to swallow hard against the sudden lump that formed in my throat. "You both look absolutely beautiful," I said, my voice a little rough with emotion. And I meant every word. They were perfect. As for me, I dug out the only suit I owned, the one I had worn at my own wedding to Sarah 11 years earlier. It was a little too tight across the shoulders now, and the fabric at the elbows was starting to fray, but it would have to do. My appearance didn't matter. As long as my girls were treated with kindness and respect, as long as they felt cherished for just one day, that was all that mattered to me. In the few mornings before the wedding, I found myself standing in front of our small, cracked bathroom mirror, fumbling with my tie. I'd study my own reflection, a face that now looked worn and tired, etched with fine lines of stress and hardship that hadn't been there before. I looked older than my years, but I kept telling myself that I didn't need to look perfect. My only job was to be there for my girls, and to hold on to that faint, flickering hope that my family might finally see me. Not the failure, but the man I had become. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and clear. The sky over Lexington was a vast, cloudless blue. I drove the girls in my beat-up old van to the Grand Regency Hotel, the venue for the ceremony. Even from a distance, the place looked like a fairy tale palace, all white marble columns and glittering chandeliers that spilled golden light from its towering windows. I felt a wave of inadequacy wash over me the second I pulled up to the entrance. The valet, a young man in a crisp uniform, took one look at my truck, then let his eyes drift over my frayed suit with a fleeting, dismissive glance. I immediately felt like an intruder, like someone who had wandered into a world where he clearly didn't belong. I took a deep breath, reached back, and took Mia's and Chloe's hands in mine. Their small fingers squeezed back, a silent reassurance. I led them through the grand lobby, a cavernous space filled with enormous bouquets of white roses that scented the air. Servers in immaculate black and white uniforms glided past us, moving with a silent, choreographed grace. It felt like walking onto a movie set. Inside the main banquet hall, the sheer opulence was overwhelming. The room was a sea of tables draped in white silk, each one adorned with gleaming silver cutlery and rows of expensive, delicate wine glasses that sparkled under the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. The guests, a curated collection of Kentucky's elite, mingled and chatted with an easy confidence, their collective laughter echoing around the high ceilings like a continuous, exclusive symphony. I recognized a few faces here and there, old friends of my parents, business partners of the Carter family. But no one made eye contact. If their gaze happened to drift our way, it was only for a split second before flicking away. as if we were part of the hired help or an uninteresting piece of the scenery. A hostess led us through the maze of tables to our assigned spot, a small table tucked away in the farthest corner of the massive room right next to the swinging doors of the service kitchen. Waitstaff bustled in and out, the clatter of dishes a constant backdrop to our presence. The placement was so deliberate it was almost comical. It was a clear, unspoken message. My parents didn't want us anywhere near the center of the room where the spotlight would be fixed on Olivia and her new husband, David Morrison. We were to be kept in the shadows, out of sight and out of mind. I tried my best to push the sting of it away, to not let it settle in my bones. I pulled out chairs for Mia and Chloe, leaning down to whisper, "Eat whatever you like, okay? Today is a special day." Chloe's head swiveled around, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated wonder as she stared up at the sparkling chandeliers. "Daddy, this place is like a castle," she exclaimed, her high-pitched voice carrying to the nearby tables and drawing a few curious, condescending glances in our direction. I managed a weak smile for her, but that heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach was growing, spreading through my chest. Mia, my perceptive girl, sat quietly beside me, her small hands clutching the hem of her new dress. I knew she felt it too. The coldness, the invisible wall between us and everyone else in that room. She didn't have to say a word. The reception officially began as a live orchestra started to play a soft, classical piece. A hush fell over the room as Olivia made her grand entrance. She was breathtaking. Her floor-length white wedding gown was covered in glittering crystals that caught the light with every step she took. David, her groom, stood beside her, tall and perfectly composed in a flawless black tuxedo. They looked like a couple sculpted for the cover of a magazine, and the entire room erupted in a wave of enthusiastic applause. I watched my sister from our corner table, searching her face for any trace of the little girl I used to chase through the fields of our farm, the sister I used to know. But all I saw was a stranger, a polished, beautiful stranger with a perfectly rehearsed smile and eyes that held a cool, distant hardness. My parents sat at the head table, positioned right next to the stage like royalty holding court. My father, William, looked as severe and unapproachable as ever, his face a stony mask. My mother, Eleanor, was radiant in an emerald green silk dress, acknowledging guests with a regal nod, every inch the queen of this domain. Throughout the entire ceremony, they didn't look in my direction. Not once. I kept telling myself I was used to it, that their indifference no longer had the power to hurt me. But that was a lie. The truth was, every deliberately averted glance, every pointed exclusion felt like a fresh cut, a small, sharp twist of a knife. The waiters began to move through the room, pouring expensive wine and serving fragrant, exquisitely arranged plates of food that looked more like art than dinner. A short while later, Olivia and her new husband slowly made their way to the stage. My sister was a vision in her pristine white gown, the light from the chandeliers reflecting off the thousands of tiny crystals sewn into the fabric, making her glitter and shine like a princess from a storybook. Thunderous applause filled the hall, and I watched as my parents, William and Eleanor, sat at the head table, their heads held high, basking in the glow of what was clearly the proudest moment of their lives. This was the success they had always craved. Olivia took the microphone, her voice carrying through the room, sweet and confident, but with an underlying sharpness that I recognized all too well. It was the same tone our mother used when she was about to make a point. She thanked the guests, she thanked David, and then she thanked our parents for giving her, in her words, a perfect life. Then she paused. Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. A sudden cold chill snaked its way down my spine. She slowly scanned the crowd, her gaze gliding over the sea of well-dressed, unfamiliar faces until it landed, with unnerving precision, on the dark corner where my daughters and I were sitting. "Family is the most precious thing, isn't it, everyone?" Olivia said, her voice ringing out, warm but laced with something that sounded terribly artificial. We all strive to protect our family's happiness and dignity no matter what happens. Her eyes were locked on me now, and I know that somewhere in this room, my brother Liam Carter is here to witness this special day. She held the pause for a beat too long. Liam, are you there? My heart hammered against my ribs. The room felt silent, all eyes turning toward our corner. What was she doing? I didn't want to stand up. The last thing on earth I wanted was to become the center of attention in this room full of strangers. But I could feel it happening. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were already turning, seeking out the source of the interruption in our dark corner. Mia looked up at me, her own eyes wide with worry, while Chloe, bless her innocent heart, just whispered, "Daddy, Aunt Olivia's calling you." I took a shaky breath, trying to force a calm I didn't feel, and slowly got to my feet. I raised my hand in a clumsy, awkward wave. "I'm here," I managed to say, my voice coming out hoarse and tight. I tried to force a smile, but I'm sure it looked more like a grimace. Instantly, a waiter was at my side, pressing a microphone into my hand. I gripped it tightly, the cold metal sending a shiver through my fingers. I had no idea what Olivia was playing at, but a sick, heavy feeling was starting to pool in the pit of my stomach. I glanced down at Mia and Chloe, trying to offer them a reassuring look, even though I was trembling on the inside. Olivia's smile was fixed in place, but there was absolutely no warmth in it. It was the smile of a predator. "Oh, Liam, it's just so wonderful to see you here," she said, her tone dripping with a sweetness that was laced with pure sarcasm. She turned back to the crowd. "You know, everyone, my brother is a very special example of someone who chose to forge his own path." She paused for effect. "He married a poor girl completely against our family's advice, thinking that love would be enough to change his life. And now," Olivia continued, her voice ringing with false sympathy, "he's a single father raising 2 little girls all by himself, working day and night just to scrape by." She let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. "Truly admirable, isn't it? Still showing up today even with absolutely nothing to his name." The banquet hall erupted. It wasn't polite chuckling. It was loud, unrestrained laughter, as if Olivia had just delivered the punchline to the funniest joke of the entire evening. I felt the blood drain from my face, a hot flush of shame rising up my neck. My ears started to ring, and the glittering, opulent room seemed to shrink around me, pressing in on all sides. Their laughter wasn't just aimed at me, it felt like it was mocking every single sacrifice I had ever made. It was mocking the years I had struggled, the sleepless nights I had spent worrying over Mia and Chloe, all the times I had swallowed my pride just to give them a decent life. It was a public execution. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the microphone and fight back, to defend myself, my daughters, my life. But I just stood there, frozen, the microphone clutched in my hand, completely unable to form a single word. Then my mother, Eleanor, stood up. She snatched a microphone from a nearby waiter with a practiced, imperious gesture. She turned and looked directly at me, her gaze as cold and hard as ice, as if I were a piece of filth she had just found on her shoe, a permanent stain on the family's pristine reputation. "Olivia is right," she declared, her voice loud, sharp, and utterly merciless. "If Liam had listened to his father and me," she announced to the rapt audience, "if he had followed the path we so carefully laid out for him, he wouldn't be paying the price for his foolishness with this miserable life, raising 2 children all alone in poverty." She paused, letting the words sink in. Truly, he brought all of this suffering upon himself. The laughter swelled again, louder this time, a cruel, sharp wave that felt like it was physically slicing into my heart. I dropped my gaze from my mother's face and looked at my daughters, and in that moment my heart didn't just break, it shattered. Chloe, with her wide, innocent eyes, clutched my hand tightly and whispered, her small voice full of confusion, "Daddy, why are they laughing at you?" Beside her, Mia had bowed her head, her small shoulders trembling. I knew she was fighting with all her might to hold back tears. That was it. I couldn't take another second of it. I slammed the microphone down on the table, the feedback screeching for a moment. I leaned down and took my girl's hands. "Let's go," I whispered, my voice choked with rage and humiliation. "We don't need to be here." But before I could even pull their chairs out, Mia did something that stunned me into silence. She reached out, her movements swift and sure, and grabbed the microphone from the table. My little girl, so small in her simple navy blue dress, stood up straight and tall. Her small hands gripped the microphone tightly, and her voice, though trembling, echoed through the suddenly quiet hall with a shocking and resolute clarity. "Uncle David," Mia said, her voice clear and strong, "the baby in Aunt Olivia's belly, it isn't yours." Time stopped. The entire cavernous banquet hall fell utterly, completely silent. The only sound was the faint, lingering note of a violin from the orchestra. "I heard her," Mia continued, her voice gaining strength. "I heard her crying and telling Grandma and Grandpa that the baby is someone else's." I just stared at her, stunned into absolute stillness, unable to process what she had just said. Where had she heard that? Chloe clung to my arm, whispering urgently, "What's Mia saying, Daddy? What did she say?" On the stage, David, who had been beaming just moments before, had gone deathly pale. He turned slowly to face his new bride, his expression a mask of pure shock and devastating pain. Olivia, who had been so radiant and triumphant, now looked like a ghost. Her face was ashen, and she began to stammer, her composure completely shattered. "Mia, what are you saying? Don't make things up," she shouted, but her voice was shaking, thin and utterly lacking in conviction. A low murmur started to spread through the room, whispers rippling out from table to table like a virus. My father, William, shot to his feet, his face turning a deep, apoplectic red with pure fury. "Mia, you are a naughty, lying child. Who taught you to tell such vicious lies?" he bellowed. But his booming voice couldn't drown out the sea of skeptical, questioning glances that were now being aimed at the head table. I looked at my mother. She was standing frozen beside my father, a perfect, motionless statue of horror. In that moment, I knew my daughter was telling the truth. Her face was chalk white, and I could see small beads of sweat forming on her forehead, smudging her perfect makeup. It was the only sign of life in her frozen expression. Mia, though so small, stood her ground. She was still gripping the microphone, and her voice rang out again, steadier this time, filled with an unshakable conviction. "I'm not lying," she said, her gaze fixed on her grandparents. "That day at Grandma and Grandpa's house, I was playing in the hallway, and I heard Aunt Olivia crying in her room." She took a breath. "She told them that the baby wasn't Uncle David's. She said it was someone else's, and they told her she had to hide it. They said she had to marry him anyway to protect the family's reputation." My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs I thought it might actually burst. It all came rushing back to me. A family dinner a few weeks ago, one of the rare occasions my parents had deigned to invite us to their house. The entire evening had been consumed with talk of Olivia's upcoming wedding to David. I remembered it clearly now. After dinner, I had helped the maid clear the plates while my parents and Olivia disappeared into a private study to talk. Mia must have been playing quietly in the hall right outside the door. She must have overheard everything. I was floored. I was completely and utterly stunned. Not just because I'd had no idea about this monumental secret, but because my own 10-year-old daughter had found the courage to stand up and speak such a shocking, world-shattering truth in front of hundreds of people. She was doing it to protect me. In her own fierce, incredible way, she was defending my dignity when I couldn't defend it myself. After Mia finished speaking, the silence in the room was absolute. Then David, the groom, made his move. With a calm, refined composure that spoke to his wealthy, well-educated upbringing, he slowly descended the steps from the stage. He walked purposefully through the silent tables until he reached ours. Then he knelt down on one knee so he could meet Mia at eye level. "Are you sure, Mia?" he asked. His voice was quiet, stripped of any anger, a man trying desperately to maintain his composure in the middle of a hurricane. Mia nodded, her eyes welling up with tears, but her expression still resolute. "I don't want people to laugh at Daddy anymore," she whispered. "I just wanted to tell the truth." Thank you, Mia," David said, his voice remarkably steady but with a faint tremble just beneath the surface, as if he were holding back a tidal wave of emotion. "You are a very brave little girl." He stood up slowly and turned to look back at the stage. Olivia had collapsed onto the floor, a heap of crumpled white silk and shattered dreams. Her pristine wedding gown, once a symbol of her triumph, now looked like a shroud marking her downfall. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her hands covering her face, but I could see her shaking her head frantically, as if she could physically deny the truth of what had just happened. "David, you have to believe me!" she cried out, her voice breaking, but her pleas were completely lost in the rising tide of murmurs from the crowd. David didn't respond to her. He just looked at her, his expression now completely cold, utterly devoid of the warmth and love of a man who, just minutes before, was about to begin his life with her. Then he turned to the event coordinators, his voice quiet but sharp as a razor's edge. "Pause the reception," he commanded. "Cancel the remaining ceremonies. I need some time to sort this out." The banquet hall erupted. The low murmurs instantly escalated into a chaotic buzz of loud voices, shocked questions, sharp criticisms, and even a few soft, incredulous chuckles from guests who couldn't believe the drama unfolding before their eyes. The carefully composed facade of Kentucky's elite shattered in an instant. In their expensive suits and designer gowns, they lost all their composure, turning to each other to gossip and dissect the scandal with undisguised relish. A few people stood up as if to leave, but most remained glued to their seats, captivated by the spectacle on the stage, where Olivia was completely unraveling and my parents were scrambling to do damage control. My father, William, stormed onto the stage, his face contorted and red, his hands visibly shaking with rage. "This is an outrage," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger directly at Mia and me. "Liam, you let your daughter tell these lies to ruin your own sister's wedding day. What in God's name do you think you're doing?" My mother, Eleanor, rushed up to the stage behind him, hurrying to Olivia's side and wrapping her arms around her sobbing fallen princess. Then she turned to face me. Her eyes narrowed into sharp, glittering points of hatred. "Liam, what have you done to this family?" she shrieked. "You and that little girl of yours have destroyed everything." Every fiber of my being wanted to scream back at them, to shout that I hadn't done anything wrong, that the only reason I was even here was because of a stupid, faint hope for reconciliation. But I said nothing. I just stood there in the chaos and held Mia's and Chloe's hands tightly, grounding myself in the warmth of their small, trusting fingers. They were all that mattered now. I looked down into Mia's eyes, and for the first time I saw a fire burning in their depths, a strength and a resilience that I wished I'd had at her age. I didn't need to answer my parents or Olivia. Mia had already done it for me. Just as I was preparing to lead my girls out of that toxic room, another voice rang out, this one from the head table where the groom's family was seated. It was Mr. Morrison, David's father, a tall, imposing man with salt and pepper hair and a voice that boomed with natural authority. "William Eleanor," he said, rising slowly to his feet, his cold gaze sweeping across the chaos on the stage. "I believe your family owes our family an explanation." His voice was low but carried across the entire room. If what this little girl has said is true, this isn't just an insult to my son, it is an insult to our entire family. The murmurs in the hall grew louder, the tension ratcheting up another notch. A few of my own relatives, my parents' cousins, stood up, trying in vain to diffuse the escalating disaster. "It's probably just a misunderstanding," my Aunt Kate, my mother's sister, called out, her voice thin and placating. "Mia's just a child. She must have gotten confused." But their weak explanations were quickly drowned out by a barrage of pointed questions from the groom's side of the room. A woman who I assumed was David's sister stood up and pointed an accusatory finger directly at Olivia. "She's pregnant with another man's child and she still planned to marry my brother?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "Did you all think our family was some kind of a joke?" The room descended into utter chaos. Some guests were now shouting, demanding answers. Others were whispering furiously to each other, their eyes alight with suspicion and morbid curiosity. An older man, probably a friend of my father's, tried to stand up and say something to restore some semblance of order, but his voice was completely swallowed by the noise. Olivia, no longer a radiant princess but a broken woman, was still crumpled on the stage, sobbing. She made a desperate attempt to grab David's arm as he walked past her. "David, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I can explain. Please don't go." But David didn't even look back. He paused for a fraction of a second, giving Olivia one last long look of profound and utter disappointment, and then he quietly walked out of the banquet hall. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, and the sound echoed in the suffocating silence that followed. A silence that felt as if the entire world had just shattered into a million pieces. I stood there in the wreckage of the wedding, a silent observer in the middle of the chaos. But for the first time that day, I didn't feel small or out of place. I felt strangely calm. I looked down at Mia, who was still clutching the microphone like a weapon, her face flushed but her gaze unwavering. Chloe, not fully grasping the enormity of what had just happened, just hugged my leg tightly and whispered, "Daddy, can we go home now?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. "We're going home." I took my girls' hands and led them away from our corner table, walking past the gauntlet of curious stares and hushed whispers. As we stepped out into the grand lobby, I caught sight of David. He was standing just outside the main doors, lost in thought, staring out into the bright afternoon sunlight. He turned as we approached, and his gaze met mine. It wasn't filled with the pity or contempt I was so used to seeing from people in my family's world. Instead, what I saw in his eyes was a quiet, profound respect. He gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that he understood, that he saw my worth, even if it was only because he had witnessed it through Mia's courageous actions. As we walked across the parking lot toward my old van, the sounds of chaos continued to spill out from the hotel behind us. I could still hear my mother's shrill voice desperately trying to defend Olivia and my father's angry bark as he yelled at someone. But those sounds felt distant now, like they were part of another world that no longer had anything to do with me. My family's relatives were still trying to explain things away, to smooth over the cracks, but no one was really listening anymore. The Carter family, with all its carefully constructed prestige and glamorous facade, was crumbling under the weight of hundreds of judging eyes. I drove back to Cincinnati in silence, with only the faint, mournful sound of an old country song playing softly on the radio. Mia and Chloe were in the back seat. Chloe had fallen fast asleep, her head resting on her big sister's shoulder. Mia just stared out the window at the passing landscape, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, looking as if she were lost in some deep adult thought. I wanted to say something, to thank her, to ask her if she was okay after everything that had happened. But I couldn't find the right words. I didn't know where to begin. "Mia," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper in the quiet van. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to stand up for me like that. She turned to look at me, her eyes catching the passing glow of the streetlights. I wanted to, Daddy, she said, her voice firm and sure. I didn't want them to laugh at you anymore. She paused. I know how hard you work for us. You're the best dad in the whole world. I wanted them to see that too. I had to swallow hard against the tightness in my throat. My eyes burned with unshed tears. You made me so proud today, Mia, I said, my voice thick with emotion, and I had never meant anything more in my entire life. But you don't ever need to worry about me. I'm okay. Mia smiled, a small but deeply meaningful smile that reached her eyes. I know, she said, but I wanted you to know that I'm okay too. She leaned forward a little. And I'll always protect you, Daddy, just like you always protect me and Chloe. I couldn't say anything more after that. I just gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, fighting to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill over. I didn't leave that wedding feeling triumphant, or like I had somehow defeated my family or proven them wrong. That wasn't it at all. Instead, I felt a quiet, profound sense of confidence blooming inside me, a certainty that I didn't need my parents' or Olivia's approval to know my own worth. Mia, with her incredible, fierce courage, had shown me that. She hadn't just protected me from their cruelty, she had reminded me of the most important truth. She reminded me that I had raised my girls right, that the love and honesty we shared in our small, imperfect life were the only things that truly mattered. When we finally got back to our little apartment in Cincinnati, I carried a sleeping Chloe to bed and tucked her in under her worn-out quilt. Mia was sitting on the sofa, hugging a pillow to her chest. I went and sat down beside her. Do you want to tell me what happened? I asked gently. Back at Grandma and Grandpa's house? What you overheard? Mia nodded, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. That day we went to visit their house, she began. I was playing with my dolls in the hallway. I heard Aunt Olivia crying in her bedroom. I didn't mean to listen, but she was so loud. She took a breath. She told Grandma and Grandpa that she was pregnant, but that the baby wasn't Uncle David's. She said it was with another man, someone she met before she was with him, and they told her she had to hide it. They said Uncle David could never find out because if he did, the family would lose everything. I listened to her story, a complicated storm of emotions swirling inside me. There was anger, hot and sharp, that my parents would so easily choose their precious reputation over basic honesty and truth. And there was a surprising flicker of sadness for Olivia who, despite all the pain she had caused me, was still my sister, trapped in a cage of her own making. But above all else, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. I was so incredibly proud of my daughter, this small person who had chosen to stand up for what was right, even at just 10 years old. You did so well today, Mia, I said, my voice thick as I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair. I am so proud of you. In the days that followed the disastrous wedding, our small apartment in Cincinnati seemed quieter than usual. The radio still played its old country songs, Chloe's happy chatter about her dolls still filled the air, and the soft murmur of Mia reading in her corner was a familiar comfort, but something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't that the world outside had changed, but I felt a new lightness inside myself, as if a heavy, invisible stone had finally been lifted from my chest. Mia, with her incredible act of courage, had not only defended me against my family's public humiliation, but she had also shown me with undeniable clarity that I didn't need anyone's validation to know my own worth. I was a father. I was a good man. And that was enough. I didn't hear anything directly from my parents or Olivia, of course. But news has a way of traveling, and whispers from old, distant acquaintances eventually found their way to me. Olivia's wedding had been officially, irrevocably canceled. David, true to the principled character I had witnessed, had demanded a DNA test immediately following the reception. The results, I was told, confirmed what Mia had overheard. The baby in Olivia's womb was not his. He had cut off all contact with her immediately, and the Morrison family, with all their pride and prestige, had publicly condemned the Carter family for their attempted deception. The Carter name, once a shining symbol of glamour and old money in Kentucky, was now the subject of salacious gossip, not for its wealth or its power, but for its deceit and its shame. I felt no joy at their public downfall. They were still my family, however broken and distant, but I felt no guilt either. I had wasted too many years of my life trying to earn their approval, hoping that one day my parents would finally see me, truly see me for who I was. Now I finally understood that I didn't need that anymore. I had Mia, I had Chloe, and that was all that ever truly mattered. One morning, about a week after the wedding, I was in our small kitchen making breakfast. I was spreading toast with strawberry jam for Chloe and pouring myself a mug of black coffee when the doorbell rang. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I went to the door and opened it. And there on my doorstep, looking completely out of place against the peeling paint of my apartment building, stood my mother, Eleanor. And beside her, looking pale and defeated, was Olivia. My mother was still trying to project her usual regal air, but her eyes were deeply weary, and the lines around her mouth seemed to have etched themselves deeper into her face. Olivia, in stark contrast, looked like a mere shadow of her former self. Her usually perfect blonde hair was messy and unkempt, and her eyes were red and swollen from days of crying. I just stood there in the doorway, completely unsure of what to say, my hand gripping the doorknob to steady myself. "Liam," my mother said, her voice still sharp but with an unmistakable tremor running through it. "What have you done to this family, you and that girl of yours, Mia? You've destroyed everything." Her voice rose with every word. "Our reputation, Olivia's future. It's all gone. All because of that child's vicious mouth." Olivia stepped forward then, pointing a trembling finger at me, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and raw pain. "Who do you think you are, Liam?" she cried. "You just stood there and let her say those things in front of all those people. Do you have any idea what I've lost? David won't even look at me. This is all your fault. Yours and hers." I felt the familiar hot rush of anger rise in my chest, but this time I didn't let it silence me. I looked straight into Olivia's tear-streaked face, then met my mother's cold gaze, and when I spoke, my voice was calm, steady, and firm. "No, Olivia," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. "It wasn't me or Mia who destroyed anything. You did. You chose to lie." I shifted my gaze to my mother. "And you and Dad chose to help her hide the truth, all to protect the precious reputation you value more than your own children. Mia only spoke the truth, and I will be proud of her for that for the rest of my life." My mother's jaw literally dropped, as if she couldn't believe I had finally dared to speak back to her. "How dare you talk to me like that?" she shrieked, her voice thin with outrage. "You who abandoned this family to run off with some worthless girl, only to be left behind to live in this squalor? You think you're noble?" I took a deep breath, feeling the anger churning inside me, but it was anchored by that new, solid confidence. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "I have built a life for my daughters, for Mia and Chloe. I don't need you or anyone else to tell me who I am anymore. I don't regret choosing Sarah, and I certainly don't regret raising my girls to be honest, compassionate people. If you and Olivia think that reputation matters more than truth, then that is your choice to make. But it's not mine." Olivia burst into fresh tears, turning away, completely unable to respond. My mother just stared at me, her eyes blazing with fury, but for the first time I saw something else there too, a flicker of helplessness. She turned without another word, pulling Olivia along with her, and they left. As the door clicked shut behind them, I felt as if a long, painful chapter of my life had finally closed with it. I had no idea if I would ever see them again, but for the first time I wasn't afraid of that distance. I had chosen my path, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it was the right one. A few days later, I was driving Mia and Chloe to the grocery store when my phone started buzzing nonstop in my pocket. I don't pay much attention to social media, but when I stopped at a red light, I saw dozens of notifications from people I didn't even know. An old friend from high school had sent me a link, and when I finally opened it, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. It was a video from Olivia's wedding, clearly recorded on a phone by one of the guests. It had captured the entire thing. The moment Mia grabbed the microphone, her small, trembling but resolute voice ringing out, exposing my sister's secret to the entire room. The video had gone viral. Someone had posted it online, and it had spread like wildfire across Kentucky with thousands of shares and an avalanche of comments. I started reading through them, my heart beating faster with each one I scrolled past. This father raised an incredible girl. Her courage is just astonishing. Liam Carter is a respectable dad. Despite his struggles, he raised honest, strong children. This little girl is a gem. The Carter family should be ashamed of themselves for looking down on them like that. My throat tightened. I wasn't used to praise, especially not on the internet where words are so often cheap and fleeting. But these comments felt different. They weren't just empty praise, they were a wave of validation. A chorus of encouragement from complete strangers who knew nothing about me or my life beyond that one single powerful moment with Mia. I turned to look at her in the rearview mirror. She was sitting in the back seat, completely absorbed in an old book I'd bought her from a second-hand store. "Mia," I said, my voice a little hoarse, "people are talking about you online." She looked up, her big eyes wide with surprise. "Talking about what, Daddy?" I handed her the phone. As she read through the comments, a slow blush spread across her cheeks. "Daddy, they're calling you a great dad," she said, a huge, happy smile spreading across her face. "See? I told you. You're the best dad ever." Chloe, overhearing us from her car seat, immediately chimed in. "I want to be on the internet, too." I laughed, a real full-throated laugh, and reached back to squeeze her knee. "You don't need to be on the internet, sweetheart. You and your sister have already made me prouder than you can ever imagine." But the viral video didn't just bring praise. In the weeks that followed, something truly amazing started to happen. A local charity organization reached out, offering us financial support to help cover our living expenses. A Cincinnati-based trucking company saw the story and offered me a new job with much better pay and more flexible hours, which meant I could finally quit my second job and spend more time with my girls. It didn't stop there. A few kind strangers, people who had been moved by the video, started sending gifts to our apartment. There were boxes of books for Mia, new toys for Chloe, and handwritten cards filled with words of encouragement. One letter from an elderly woman all the way in Lexington touched me the most. It simply said, "Thank you for raising a girl like Mia. She reminds me that honesty and courage still matter in this world." Our life began to change. It became easier. I no longer had to juggle two exhausting jobs or lie awake all night staring at the ceiling, worrying about how I was going to pay the bills. We still lived a simple life. Our apartment still had its cracked walls and our furniture was still old and worn. But the oppressive weight that had always seemed to hang in the air was gone. In the evenings, the three of us would pile onto the sofa together, eating cookies and watching cartoons. Chloe was obsessed with Frozen, of course, but Mia always picked Matilda. She said she wanted to be smart and strong, just like the main character. Those moments, as simple and ordinary as they were everything I had ever dreamed of. My girls were growing up, not just in size, but in the way they thought about the world. They were starting to ask bigger questions. One evening, as we were munching on chocolate chip cookies, Mia suddenly asked, "Daddy, why is honesty so important? Is telling the truth always the right thing to do?" I thought about it for a moment, trying to find a way to explain it that was simple but also true. "Honesty is like a lantern, Mia," I finally said. "Sometimes it can be scary because it lights up dark corners and shows you things you might not want to see. But it also helps you find your way. It helps you know where you're really going. You did the right thing at the wedding," I continued, looking her right in the eye. "You didn't just protect me, you protected yourself because you chose to be honest." Mia nodded, her eyes shining in the soft lamplight. "I want to grow up to be strong like you, Daddy," she said. "You never give up no matter how hard things get. I want to be like that too." I smiled and pulled her into a hug. "You're already stronger than I am, Mia," I whispered into her hair. And Chloe, though she was still so young, was starting to follow her big sister's lead. One afternoon, her teacher told me that Chloe had stood up in front of the whole class to apologize for accidentally spilling a friend's pencil case. In that moment, I realized that Mia's honesty and courage were contagious, rubbing off even on her little sister. One weekend, I decided it was finally time to keep a promise I had put off for far too long. I loaded Mia and Chloe into our old van and drove them to Kings Island, the huge amusement park they had been dreaming of visiting for as long as they could remember. I had been carefully saving a little money from my new job, and I was determined to give them one truly perfect, special day. The second we walked through the gates of the park, Mia's and Chloe's joyous laughter rang out like music, and I knew I had made the right decision. Chloe let out a high-pitched squeal at the sight of a massive roller coaster, while Mia tugged my hand, pulling me toward the water park area where fountains sprayed glittering arcs of water under the bright sun. I just stood there for a long moment, watching them run and laugh, feeling a sense of deep, uncomplicated peace that I hadn't known in years. The sunlight filtered down through the trees, catching the pure joy on my daughters' faces, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was why I existed. This was my purpose. I sat on a nearby bench watching them dart in and out of the water jets and thought about my long, strange journey. I used to believe that strength was found in wealth and reputation, in all the things my parents had always valued above all else. But now I finally understood. True strength was in the unconditional love and unwavering honesty I shared with my girls. Mia, with her incredible courage, hadn't just saved my dignity that day. She had fundamentally changed the way I saw myself. I was no longer Liam Carter, the black sheep, the failure in my family's eyes. I was just Liam, Mia, and Chloe's father. And that was a man who didn't need anyone else to define him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I called the girls over and handed each of them a big cone of ice cream. We sat together on a patch of grass, watching as the park's thousands of colorful lights began to glow against the deepening twilight sky. Chloe leaned her head against my shoulder, her eyelids already starting to droop, and Mia sat cross-legged beside me, a contented smile on her face. "Daddy, today was the best day ever," Chloe said, her voice soft and sleepy. Mia nodded in agreement, looking at me with those shining, thoughtful eyes. "Daddy," she said, "we'll have more days like this, right?" "Absolutely," I said, pulling them both into a tight hug, breathing in the smell of sunshine and cotton candy. So many more. I looked from one of their precious faces to the other, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Our best chapter has only just begun, my darlings.